Sounds silly, but it's true. So don't pretend it ain't you too. 'Cause we're all afraid of something. 'Cause you're not human without fear.
So what are you afraid of? No, really. Now, it's easy for me to remember what I used to be afraid of, and actually easy for me to talk about that. Can you remember when you were afraid of the dark? I can remember growing up in New Jersey, and my bedroom was was across the hall from my parents' bedroom, and so if I woke up in the middle of the night and I was afraid, I would really need to work up my courage to make the dash off of my bed, because I knew there was something underneath it, right? And make it to my parents' bed before something grabbed me. Now, I knew if I made it there, it would be okay. But that fear kept me from what I needed, a hug, because I was terrified to leave my bed. That's the kind of fear. Anybody afraid of anything like that? I'm afraid of horses. Because of experiences when I was young. I'm afraid of zone defenses. I'd much rather play basketball against man-to-man, and I can remember in college when I saw another team setting up into a zone, I just went, ah. What else? I mean, there's a lot of things. Now, those are all innocent, right? It's really easy to talk about things we're afraid of if it's past tense or if it's almost comical. But there are fears that we have that are important to acknowledge. And I want to talk about that for the next few weeks. This morning, what I want to do is talk about how fear works and what it's for, really, and just begin to talk about how we get fears that hold us back from being who we really need to be. And next week, I want to talk about how to kind of move through that. There is a way. So, what is fear? Let's just kind of, and you're not going to see PowerPoint slides up there today because they're lost halfway somewhere between Seattle and here. So my apologies. And the formatting on the notes is a little wacky. The whole place is wacky this morning, but it's one of my great fears, right? So fear is just simply an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain, or a threat. That's a simple definition of the word fear as a noun. Now, the way our bodies are wired is absolutely remarkable. And the physiological process that happens when you feel or when you experience a fear stimulus is unbelievable. We have no idea what goes on inside of our bodies. Now, I have a common fear symbol on the notes that is a common fear symbol in our house, spider. Anybody else? Okay, good. So when a spider is seen in close proximity, immediately your eyes, if they're seeing it, well, your brain picks up the image from your eyes. Your brain then cues in your thalamus, and your thalamus sends a message to your amygdala, and it says what? Fight or flight. Yeah. So if you don't think about it, and before you think about it, you either whack the thing or you scream and jump backwards if a spider is something you're afraid of. And you think, I wish I didn't kill that spider. No, you didn't really think about it. It's the fight or flight mechanism, and that's the first reason fear is so important. Now, it was more important to our ancestors than it is to us, but still important to us. So 10,000 years ago, if you were carrying, a jug of water up from the river and you saw a lion, you didn't want to have to go, okay, now this is a lion. No, right? You just ran. And amazingly, what happens in your body when that hypothalamus gland is triggered, the thalamus gland is triggered, amazing things happen physically. Your pupils dilate so that you can see better if it's a low light situation. Your blood vessels constrict, and they give your muscles as much blood as they possibly can. That's why sometimes if you kind of get a start, you feel a chill. There's no blood in your skin. It pulls in as deep as it can go. Your palms will sweat. Your muscles will tighten. And amazing things. Of course, your adrenaline glands open, and you're ready for action. That happens without you thinking about it consciously at all. And it's terribly important. If that didn't happen, you would not be here. Chances are you would have already been eliminated by something, whether it's a jump off of the roof or a car, or just think of the last time you had that feeling of fear and what it saved you from. Now, that's not the fear that I'm talking about. That is a very healthy reaction, and there's not much we can do about that, really. Now, there is a little bit, technically, but we're not going to worry about that. That fear will keep you alive and keep the spider population low in your 3-season porch. As we talk about fear over the next couple of weeks, what we're talking about is fear's thoughtful path. And if you look at the chart in your notes, I have a low road and a high road. So at the same time that your brain triggers that involuntary system to get you ready to go, it also sends a signal up into your thinking brain. Sends up into your sensory cortex. It says something like this. Now that's a spider. Does it have a red red mark on its belly in the shape of an hourglass? Right? Now, you can't look at that first. Your immediate reaction is, ha, or whack. But while that's happening, your neocortex comes into play, and your brain goes, okay, I've seen spiders before. I know something about spiders. Is this a brown recluse? No. Is this a black widow? No. What kind of a spider is this? I don't know. Why am I afraid of spiders? I don't know. What are you making such a big deal about this for? And all of those thoughts are going through your brain. And if you didn't hurt yourself when you jumped backwards and didn't hurt the spider, by swatting it, you could actually come to a more rational decision about what to do next. Just get the shot back. Problem solved, right? So what we're talking about is why and how that higher road of thinking about fear is wired and how to rewire it. Now, why should we rewire it? Well, there's some things that we're afraid of that we don't need to be. And there's some things that we're not afraid of that we should be. In just a little research I did this week, I just kind of checked in the top 10 fears that we have as Americans. What do you think number 1 is? Terrorists right now. Number 1 fear in America today for people who have been polled, Gallup polled, are terrorists. Number 2, and this is where my formatting got wacky between the Mac and the PC, but number 2 fear, spiders. It's true. Number 3, death. You fear spiders more than death. It's amazing. Number 4, failure. Anybody here fear failure? Okay, yeah. Number 5 is actually heights. Anybody afraid of heights? Okay, good. Number 6, war. Anybody afraid of war? Yeah. Now, when it's in its rightful place, fear is a perfect mechanism designed to keep us alive and well. We need it, we welcome it, and fearlessness is not the goal. You don't want to be fearless. If you are in a position where you need to fear, so let me just cut to the chase here and say this. Here is a situation where fear would save your life. You're driving down the 5, going down to see friends in LA, and you left after work on a Friday night, and you battled the East Bay traffic, right? And near around Bakersfield, you start doing this. Anybody ever had that experience? And while you're driving and you're thinking, oh man, I got to get a coffee, all of a sudden you feel the rumple strips, and then the shoulder of the road, dust is flying, and your amygdala says, watch out! And an adrenaline shot comes into your body that is so strong. All of these physiological changes happen so quickly that you could not close your eyes if you wanted to, right? Have you ever had that experience? Wow! Now I am wide awake. Well, fear just saved your life. That's how it works. And now that's a simple example, but so I want you to hear me say, first of all, that's not what we're talking about. We don't want to change that. We don't want to mess with that. We can't like replug in new software and get an update so that that doesn't happen. It's important, and we're going to leave that as it is. Now, here's an interesting kind of an interesting way to look at it. At the same time that your brain is saying, wake up, you're going to die when you're going down the 5, the thinking part of your brain, sensory cortex, begins processing things. What should I do? I should keep driving. I should get caffeine. I should just pull over and spend the night. Now, that's the kind of thinking and belief systems that we're talking about that we're going to grow and change into healthier ones. So if you're 18 and carefree, you go, oh, well, that'll never happen again. I'm just going to keep driving, right? But after about 15 minutes, it does happen again. So what I want to do is just unpack the thinking brain's adaptation of fear. Now, this is what I know. Fear is a part of our lives, but it's not content to stay within its well-defined sphere of influence. Fear likes to take over. It's like a river. A river during, every day in, day out life, it's perfect, but you flood it and the river destroys things, right? So keeping fear within its banks, in its well-defined place in our life, is really what we're talking about. If it gets out of the place that it's supposed to be, it will prevent you from being who you really are designed to become. Now, what do I mean? Let me just give you some information about fear. As I said earlier, fearlessness is not the opposite of bravery. Courage is important. It's a huge value. Courage is the opportunity that we take to do whatever it is we need to do in spite of being afraid of it. Does that make sense? Courage isn't, well, I don't have any fears. That's not courage. That's just, for lack of a better term, that's just stupidity. If we don't have fears, then there's something wrong with us. Courage is the act of doing what I know I need to do in spite of feeling fear and doing it. It's taking a risk, courage or bravery. So fearlessness is not the goal. It's the thoughtful fear that wisdom literature mentions all the time. Let me read you some passages from the Scriptures. Psalm 23, we all know this one, but listen to it. Listen to what David is saying about fear. The Lord is my shepherd. Let me find it. I shall not be in want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear. Now, what David is talking about, probably, in the valley of the shadow of death, is one of the passages that you have to walk through to get down out of Jerusalem or to climb up out of Jerusalem to be a shepherd. It's a shepherding passage. So some of the pathways that you had to take as a shepherd to get your sheep into the upper pastures were very dangerous. People would hide there, and they want what you have. And so when David says, even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I won't fear the evil. I will not fear because, why? You've got my back. That's the fear we're talking about. Now, that doesn't mean David's not cautious. It means he's not paralyzed. It means he's not so afraid that he won't do what he has to do. Scripture talks about fear in amazing ways. on any number of places. In fact, do you know what the number one command in the Bible is? Do not be afraid. Now, God is not saying, the writers are not saying, don't be afraid of anything. Because some fear is good, and it's the way we're designed. Saying you don't have to be afraid because I have your back. This fear is amazing. I mean, the more I looked at it, the more I began to think that this is one of the things that I think sets a lot of us off. Now, I'm not going to take the time to read all of these passages, but Matthew chapter 1 is the first book in the Newer Testament, and I'm beginning to work on our Christmas series, and so Matthew 1 really struck me this week. Matthew 1, Joseph, Joseph of Joseph and Mary fame. Mary tells Joseph earlier that she's pregnant, and that she's pregnant in some miraculous fashion, and Joseph has no idea what she's talking about. Joseph was like, what? You're what? And you can't blame him, right? And so listen to Matthew chapter 1. Matthew recounts what really happened, and it says this. Because Joseph, her husband, was a righteous man and did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had a mind to divorce her quietly. But after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary to be your wife. Now, I thought this week, what was he afraid of? Because that was the issue, right? The issue was fear. So he could have been afraid of doing something against the law of God. And Torah says, if a woman is found to be pregnant during the betrothal period, she is to be stoned, or she can be put away privately. Those are the two choices Joseph was considering. He could be afraid, I really would like to marry this girl, but he could have been afraid of what other people would say. Anybody, don't raise your hands. Is that an issue for anybody? I'm afraid to do what I want to do because of what other people, now that will think, will say, might think, might say. I'm afraid they may get the wrong impression. That's a big fear. I mean, that's a fear that most of us, if we're not driven by it, at least we check in with it. So Joseph is afraid, and an angel comes to him and says, it's okay. What she's telling you is the truth. And Joseph, void of that fear, follows through and becomes Mary's husband and father to Jesus. It's remarkable. The word fear and afraid is one of the words that appears almost innumerably in the Scriptures. Now, what I want you to understand, another fact about fear is this. Your fear is not your friend. And it's not one of the most exciting things about you. Now, some people define themselves by that. Hi, I'm Joe. I really can't do that. I mean, that really bothers me, and I'm not. Horseback riding? No. I don't think so. I'm not only afraid of horses, they smell like grim death. I mean, you have to admit. That's for your benefit, Erica. You're going to put your name in for the new position that just opened? I just saw it on the board out there in the lunchroom. No, I'm not going to put my name in. Well, why not? Well, the real reason is because I'm afraid of rejection. I'm afraid I'm not good enough. I'm afraid that I'll be ignored. I'm afraid that I can't do it. That's not the reason I give at that moment, right? The reason I give at that moment is, oh, you know what, I'm really busy and there's stuff happening in the family right now. It's not a good time for me. Your fear is not the most exciting part of you. It's not the most beautiful part of who we are. Our fear, now not the amygdala fear, okay? The fear that we learn to live in is not our friend. It is not helpful to us. It is not like a gentle uncle that rides along with us and kind of guides us through life. That is not what fear is. Our fears keep us from almost everything that's good when fear comes into play. Fear has a very limited vocabulary. This is what your fear says. Stop! Don't do it! Run! Fight! No! Do you ever have the conversation about whether you have a yes face or a no face? You know people like that? You know, you're kind of walking through wherever and you see this person. That is a no face. I hate no faces. And you're just like, man, what's the matter? Fear has a perpetual no face. It will tell you you can't, you better not try. If you do, you'll be embarrassed again. That's what fear does. I talk to people sometimes about relationships, and they'll say something like this, well, I'm never going to get married again. And, well, why not? Well, my last 6 marriages were so bad. I've just not had good experiences, and I understand that. But see here, let's just think this through with me for a second. I get that logic. But let's just get really logical about it. What you need to be able to say is, I'm never going to marry that person again. And if I ever get married again, I'm not going to bring this same person into the relationship, right? You see how that's different? So it's so easy for me to say, well, I'm never going to Cleveland again, or I'm never going to get married again, or I'm never going to have another child, or I'm never going to, because of a bad experience, which is where we learn fear. But then I lump all of those like situations together, and I prevent myself from being a part of the beauty of that thing if I could live it in a healthy way. That's why God is so jealous for us to not be afraid. Fear. It'll paralyze you. Now, what I would like to do is to have you hear the voice of your fear more than ever. The what? Yeah. So, let's just do a little thought experiment. It's in your notes here. And feel free to kind of join in. But you realize one day that or maybe a friend comes up and says, you know, Joe, you rarely put yourself out there. I mean, you're really like well within your limits. You live such a safe life. Why don't you ever, why wouldn't you apply for that job? Or why wouldn't you go to this basketball game? Or why don't you try a new sport? Or what about going out with this person? Or, get out and live a little bit, right? Why don't you push yourself out there? Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. And this is what I mean by listening to your fear. When you consider putting yourself out there, whatever that means to you, you need to listen to the voice in your head. Now, to do that, you have to be quiet. So in this thought experiment, you realize you really put yourself out there, and you begin to understand it's because of fear. So why don't I try new things? Why don't I do this or that or whatever it is? You begin to think to yourself, I'm afraid of being rejected. I'm afraid that the people in that group, now here's a good one. So there's a group of men in Novato who love old motorcycles. And I love old motorcycles. And on Saturday morning at 8:45, they meet at the San Marin High School, and they ride on these old motorcycles. Some of them, like, unbelievable, restored. I know this is really boring for you, but there's a point to the story. And they get on them and they ride the Point Reyes station, they have breakfast, and then they ride back. And I would drive by in my car, and I would think, gosh, look at that. Look at those guys. What fun. And then I would go home and I would sit on my old motorcycles. And I have some, nice ones. And the next week I would go, and what was I thinking? I was thinking, I wonder if they'll like me. And all of a sudden, I was 6 on the playground, 6 years old. Right? What is it? Why don't you just ride your old motorcycle over there? Well, theirs are nicer than mine. I don't know if they'll really like me. Go for it. Now that's what would be nice. Wouldn't it be nice if you could just say, okay, I'm going to go for it? And that's what all I want us to do this week is just identify the times when fear keeps us. Because it's not a simple process. So you go, okay, I realize that the reason I'm not putting myself out there is that I'm afraid of something. Maybe I'm afraid of being misunderstood. I'm afraid that I'm not going to, here's a good one for me, I'm afraid that I'm not going to win. Ever have that fear? You don't participate in something because you know you're not going to be able to win, and so rather than just kind of be in it and not win, you choose not to do it? What's that about? It's a good question. So, in this thought experiment, when I'm going, okay, I don't want to take my motorcycle out there because these guys might not like me, they might not accept me, they may just think. Then I go, man, where does that come from? And I can remember vividly all these memories then, right? Now, if you begin an inquisition with yourself, a gentle one, you'll answer yourself. Where did that start? And all of a sudden I remembered the summer, fall of 1971, 72. Remember that? Remember that? Yeah. Well, I was in junior high. And we moved so many times during those years. And every time I'd walk into a new classroom, tall, gangly, skinny, goofy, that was my thought, right? All of these kids, they all know each other. And just about the time I would kind of connect, for some family reasons, we would move again. It's like, okay, I get where that comes from. It's not unreasonable, but I don't have to think that way anymore. Now, it was a protection thing. I didn't have anybody to, in 1971, when you came home from middle school, your father didn't say, hey, son, sit down here. Let's talk about your feelings. Right? And I don't blame him for not doing that. He didn't have the skills necessary to do that. But see, what I'm saying is no one did it. And so I was left with myself thinking, okay, so you're going to think I'm really screwy, but I was left with myself thinking, you're not good enough, strong enough, fast enough, smart enough. And so you're never really going to be part of that group. Now that turned into a belief system for me, see? And that's why I'm afraid to stop and see the guys on the motorcycles. Now, I have since done it, and they didn't like me. No, it's not true. So what I'm suggesting is this. We have to listen to ourselves. I think that we have, I want to make it plain. And it's probably not this plain and this clear. But I'm going to make it overly clear. I'm going to give us a choice that's overly black and white, okay? Just for the sake of discussion. I think we can say it like this. You could either live your life at the mercy of your fears, or you can begin to learn how to become openly curious with yourself. Now, if you become openly curious with yourself, then you start asking yourself questions like this. Well, why don't I put my name up there for that job posting? And see, the beautiful thing is that you'll answer yourself. Now, hear me for just a second. You will say, if you say to yourself, why don't I put my name up there for the job? You'll say this, you're not qualified. Well, whoa. Where did that come from? See, I don't need anyone else to do that. My ego does it. Right? My false self, the self that I created. You're not qualified. You're not smart enough. You know all those people have degrees from... And what most of us do is we go, yeah, you're right. And we slink back to our desk. Nah, you don't slink. I mean, life is good, right? And someone gets the job posting, or someone, whatever it is that we're talking about, and we're kind of left just the way we were. Now, I've recently been reading, not quite finished, with a book by the most amazing woman named Liz Gilbert. You may have read a book called Eat, Pray, Love. That wasn't my favorite book, but what a beautiful writer. She's got a book out now called Big Magic. Have you seen that? So you just need to buy this book and read it. So I bring it up because she makes an analogy in this book that is the most brilliant thing I have ever heard of about fear in my life, and I want to share it with you. And with this, we'll close. Think of your life like a road trip. Now, who likes road trips? Gosh. You get in the car, you get a cooler in the back, snacks. I used to pore over paper maps. Remember those days? And I still like to have one on a road trip. And you get in the car and off you go. Now, I want you to think about taking a road trip with your fear. And here's my question. Liz Gilbert's question, really. Where does fear sit? Just think about it for a second. Is fear driving? Because if fear is driving, you're not going to have any fun. Think, no, fear isn't driving, I'm driving. Okay, is fear riding shotgun? And I'm going to say, don't let fear ride shotgun. Is fear sitting in the back? You know, fear's got to go. You have fear. Fear's going to go on this trip. But let me suggest that you give fear this speech. And this is the gist of what we're talking about. You say, fear, you're not driving. You're not even sitting in the shotgun seat. You can sit in the back and keep your mouth shut. Do not touch the radio. Do not try to make a decision. Do not try to tell me when to stop for food or when to have a snack or what kind of snacks to have. You just sit in the back and you keep your mouth closed. Now, if there's a semi coming right at me, then you yell and I'll listen. But you don't get to make any other decisions on this trip. Wouldn't that be a great way to live? John said it like this in 1 John chapter 4. He said, God is love. And perfect love, there is no fear in love. There is no fear in love. And perfect love, complete love, removes all fear. Now, it would be nice to shoot for perfect love. Have the cosmic Christ fill you so that you are love. That's a struggle. And so I know I'm going to still have some fears. But, friends, I want to know when fear's weighing in on a decision. Because I do not want to live my life with fear in the driver's seat. Now, the only way I know how to deal with this is through what is called a conditioned response. You know a conditioned response. The old rat experiments. Or even Pavlov. Okay, let's go to the dogs. That's a conditioned response. You give the dog food, you ring a bell. Give the dog food, and the dog salivates when he sees the food. Give a dog food, you ring a bell. And then pretty soon you just ring the bell, and what happens? The dog salivates. That's called a conditioned response. That's how I have learned all of my unhealthy fears. There was a time when they were either important or necessary for me to cope. But they're not anymore, at least in that context. And so just like I learned them through a conditioned response, I can unlearn them in a similar way. But I first have to understand what they are. If you want to believe in your own life again and become the beauty that you really are, and you are, okay? Let's just get that straight. You're magnificent. People are going, well, yeah, you think I'm magnificent, but you don't really know me. See that voice that said that? That's the voice we're talking about. Well, how do you know I'm magnificent? Well, because you're made in the image and likeness of God. You've got God, very God, stamped on your heart in the deepest part of you. And what we've done is we've allowed these things to cover it up. And so we live as if God's out there and we're down here, but It's just not true. So what I want you to do this week, my hope, if you want to kind of move in this week, is for you to listen when someone says, hey, you want to go to the movies? And you say no. It's okay to say no, but just go, okay, why did I say no? All right? And if your life is like a road trip, just answer this question for yourself. Where in the car is fear sitting? This is my hope. My hope is that you'll take the road trip in a 1972 Ford Town & Country wagon, and fear will be in the back seat facing backwards. And hopefully it'll get sick on the trip. Remember those days? Please don't let it sit right next to you. And by any means, don't let it drive. Now, this week, just notice. Next week, we'll talk about how to take it from where it is and move it back a few seats, okay? So, God, we're grateful. We're grateful for what you have to say about fear. And we've just skimmed the surface this morning, Father, really, just trying to understand how it works and so. But we know that that's not how you want us to live. And we know there's an inverse relationship between fear and love. And so I pray that you would help us to listen this week, to get quiet enough to listen, to notice. God, I'm grateful for the people and resources you bring into our life. And I'm grateful for Liz Gilbert and the way that she writes in such a beautiful way to kind of expose these things. And so I pray your blessings on her today, wherever she is. So help us, Father, to listen. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. By the way, Thursday nights around here at 7 o'clock in this room, we have a time to listen. You can call it a meditation group. You can call it a contemplative prayer group. But we meet in here for 1 hour, and we get quiet, and there's some guidance. But during that time, you will be able to hear. It won't be easy at first if you've never done this, but not impossible. But you'll be able to begin to see and hear what's really going on inside your heart. And I want to invite you into that space if it works for you. So have a great day, you guys. You're dismissed.
I'm scared to learn because I'm scared of the truth. Don't want to gain weight because I'm scared of the food. I'm scared to think that the label dropped me. I'm scared to think of my album flopping. This may sound silly, but it's true. So don't pretend it ain't you too. 'Cause we're all afraid of something. 'Cause